CBA meeting. It's cute. The CBA has provided the opportunity for the public to participate via the WebEx platform. When we take public comments, we will begin by taking public comments from those in the room here in Sacramento. Then we'll ask the moderator to please open up the lines for any public comment. Each public comment will be allocated up to 5 minutes. Ms. Reed, can you please establish a quorum? Pause.
The moderator has stepped away, so they haven't started recording.
This meeting is being recorded.
We'll establish a quorum, please, Ms. Reed.
Nancy Corrigan. Nancy Corrigan, present. Carrie Ann Farrell Hines. Good morning, present. Dan Jacobson.
Here.
Christian Lada. Present. Dee Dee Owens. Present. Ariel Pay.
Present.
Joe Rosenbaum.
Present.
Michael Savoy.
Present.
And Evangeline Ward. We have a quorum.
Thank you. The CBA's mission is to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with established professional standards. This mission is derived from the statutory requirement that protection of the public shall be the highest priority for the CBA in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary action functions. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. I'd like to please remind all members to pull the microphone really close, make sure it's on, so we can hear each other. Thank you. Before we begin, I would just like to remind everybody that today Ms. Reed calls, when we call for a vote, we'll be doing it randomly, not necessarily alphabetical order. So I know everybody's used to their name being after somebody else's, but be ready when your name is called. Thank you. Okay, let's move along to item 1, public comments for items not on the agenda. Anybody in Sacramento have anything? Not seeing any. Moderator, please open it up for any other public comments regarding items not on the agenda.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of a square, typically in the lower right corner of your WebEx screen, and in the text field type, I would like to make a comment. Make sure it goes to all panelists and click send. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Okay, moving along to item 2. At our November meeting, the CBA will elect a new president, vice president, and secretary. You notice no secretary, vice president today. I feel I'm wearing 3 hats, but it is what it is. The president, vice president, and secretary treasurer will serve 1-year terms, but may not serve more than 2 consecutive terms. CBA members who wish to be considered for the leadership position should submit a statement of qualifications to Ms. Reed, the board relation analyst, no later than October 7th. A couple of weeks. Thank you. Each year, the CBA president and vice president issue a performance evaluation to the executive officer typically occurring at our November meeting. The evaluation is based on input from all CBA members and DCA's leadership team. Following this meeting, DCA will provide CBA members with an evaluation form. To assist members in completing the evaluation, the CBA annual report is an excellent resource, and it will also be sent via email today or immediately following the meeting. Additionally, members may wish to reflect on the executive officer's monthly reports, presentations at prior CBA meetings, and the many communications that have been provided during the prior fiscal year. All of these resources provide an overview of the activities, projects, programs, and accomplishments for which the CBA executive officer has overseen. Please be available and have available your completed evaluation forms at the November CBA meeting for a closed session discussion to finalize the performance evaluation for the CBA executive officer. Item C, discussion and possible action regarding California Board of Accountancy's meeting locations and a change to the July 23rd meeting date. Ms. Pierce.
Thank you, President Svoy. Good morning, members. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the California Board of Accountancy an opportunity to discuss the possibility of conducting all California Board of Accountancy and committee meetings in Sacramento through July 1, 2023. In addition, it's also intended to discuss a proposal to change the July 2023 CBA meeting date to avoid a scheduling conflict with a National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, or Nasba, meeting. On June 30th of this year, the governor signed Senate Bill 189 that suspended various provisions of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act and enabled state bodies to meet via teleconference through July 1, 2023. This measure also suspended the requirement contained in Business and Profession Code Section 101.7A that boards must meet at least once each calendar year in Northern California and once each year in Southern California. Presently, the CBA and committee meetings are conducted in person at the CBA office in Sacramento and include a feature that allows public participation through WebEx. This format is meeting the needs of the CBA and consumers and eliminates the need to contract for meeting space, reducing overall meeting costs. While the CBA is not presently required to have a meeting in Southern California, staff explored holding a meeting at a Southern California location, and during that preliminary investigation, it was found that prices have risen sharply, as identified in the agenda item. In addition to an increase in meeting room costs, staff was informed that if the CBA holds in-person meetings outside of Sacramento, the Department of Consumer Affairs will be unable to moderate and allow the public to use the WebEx feature due to technology challenges at a non-DCA or CBA conference room. The CBA is being asked to consider conducting all CBA and committee meetings solely in Sacramento through July 1, 2023, while legislation is in place allowing this. At its March 22, 2022 meeting, kind of switching to the change in date, the CBA adopted proposed meeting dates for the 2023 calendar year. While developing the schedule of proposed dates, staff attempted to avoid conflict with potential stakeholder meetings, including the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and NASBA. Since that calendar was adopted, NASBA indicated it will be holding a meeting in July 2023 that currently conflicts with the CBA meeting date. Therefore, the CBA is being asked to move its July 2021-2023 meeting to July 27-28. This will enable CBA member participation at both meetings. Staff recommend that the CBA and all committee meetings be conducted in Sacramento through July 1, 2023, and the CBA change its meeting date from July 2021 of 2023 to July 27, 28, 2023. That is a mouthful. To avoid a conflict with a Nasba meeting. That concludes my presentation. I'll now turn it back to President Savoy, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Can I put them both together? Can I get a motion on what is being asked? Ms. Owens?
I'll move to adopt a motion to change the dates and to have the committee meetings in Sacramento.
Ms. Hines?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Mr. Jacobson?
So, thank you. I see that there's a table that shows the cost of going to Orange County. About how much does it cost to come to Sacramento for those of us who have to fly up here? If there's an estimate or if there's an estimate.
I don't have an estimate right this second, but I can certainly get it to you. I think the big difference is the meeting room cost. Here, we're not paying for any meeting room cost. When we go to another location outside of Sacramento, that's where the cost comes in, is we're securing a meeting room space at a hotel, and then also adding in audio visual, which increases the cost. So I can certainly get you the comparison for travel costs here, but that's the big difference between here and outside of Sacramento.
And are there an equivalent amount of people who travel up to Northern California that would travel down to Southern California, or more one way or the other?
I can certainly, do a comparison. I imagine it would probably be somewhat equivalent, because we'd be having staff go down to the Southern California meeting location, whereas staff here isn't having to travel because we're all in the area. So,
Yes,
but I can
staff hotel as well, stay
yeah.
where they're not charging now. So it's not only the meeting room, it's the staff having to get hotel rooms as well.
Right. Well, as well, they have to get staff for those of us in Southern California too. But so it's the meeting room, maybe a couple $1,000s.
The meeting room, I believe. Are you asking about the potential cost?
I'm sorry. Oh, the difference is there's no charge here.
Correct.
In Sacramento, and there's the charge that we see for Orange County in Orange, or
anywhere.
Excuse me for being provisional. In Southern California is written down here.
Correct.
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Nancy?
And I guess I want to comment too, and I don't think it's just any hotel, any banquet room that works. There are many details that have to be resolved in identifying an appropriate banquet room, and then adding all the audio and everything else that goes with it, shipping documents, crates and boxes of whatever. Exactly. Correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the board? Any public comments from those here in Sacramento? Moderator, please open it up for other public comments.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of a square, typically lower right corner of your WebEx screen, and type "I would like to make a comment" in the text field that appears. Make sure it goes to all panelists before clicking send. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Ms. Reed, call for a vote.
Nancy Corrigan?
Yes.
Carrie-Ann Farrell-Hines?
Yes.
Dan Jacobson?
Yes.
Christian Lotta?
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens?
Yes.
Ariel Pay?
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
And Evangeline Ward?
Abstain.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item, overview of the process for review of exposure drafts. Ms. Pierce.
Thank you. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the California Board of Accountancy with an overview of the process staff follow when reviewing exposure drafts to determine whether they are presented at a CBA meeting for discussion and possible comment. When monitoring exposure drafts, the focus is on proposed changes that directly relate to or may have an impact on the CBA's rules and regulations, or otherwise impact its ability to effectively provide oversight of the accounting profession and meet its consumer protection mandate. There are a number of national organizations that promulgate standards and guidelines impacting the accountancy profession. These organizations will publish proposed changes prior to adoption as exposure drafts. Exposure drafts identified by the CBA typically fall into two categories: those that can be considered regulatory in nature and those that are considered standard setting. Regulatory exposure drafts may include revisions being considered to the Uniform Accountancy Act, UAA model rules, or administration of the Uniform CPA examination. Standard setting exposure drafts involve the actual standards that accountancy professionals employ in conducting their business. These are not generally brought before the CBA unless they have an impact on our enforcement abilities. The current staff process for reviewing exposure drafts includes the following on a monthly basis. Staff monitor the various standard-setting websites, including AICPA and Nasba, to determine what, if any, exposure drafts have been issued. A cursory review is performed to determine its applicability to the practice of public accountancy. And then exposure drafts impacting the CBA's consumer protection mission or its rules and regulations are brought to the CBA for discussion and possible response regarding the proposed changes. Exposure drafts not presented for CBA discussion are included in the monthly executive officer's report, and CBA members have an opportunity to comment individually. Staff do not have a recommendation on this item. It has been presented for information only, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that report. Any questions, comments? Okay, moving along. The discussion and possible action on the American Institute of CPA's exposure draft on maintaining the relevance of the Uniform CPA exam and aligning the exam with the CPA evolution licensure model. Ms. Center.
Thank you. Good morning. For this item, the CBA is being asked to discuss and provide feedback in response to the AICPA June 30th, 2022 exposure draft titled Maintaining the Relevance of the Uniform CPA Examination, Aligning the Exam with the CPA Evolution Licensure Model. In July 2021, the AICPA released a CPA exam practice analysis background and survey in which this board responded with feedback of concerns in the core and discipline CPA exam sections. That is found in attachment 3. The CBA will find that the present exposure draft, which includes the draft uniform CPA examination blueprints, provides far more detail, which may alleviate prior concerns specific to the core and discipline CPA exam sections. The exposure draft is identified as attachment 1 and is available on the AICPA website. There are also a few hard copies in the back of the room. When providing feedback to the exposure draft, the AICPA requests that the board take the following into consideration. Number 1, do the core CPA exam blueprints include the knowledge and skills required of all newly licensed CPAs to protect the public interest? And 2, do each of the discipline CPA exam blueprints include the knowledge and skills required of a newly licensed CPA to protect the public interest? All responses must be provided to the AICPA by September 30th, 2022, which explains all those nagging emails that we sent all of you to read prior to the board meeting. The final exam blueprints are expected to be approved in December 2022 after all comments and feedback have been taken into consideration. The CPA exam is planned to launch in January 2024. Staff recommend that the CBA take one of the following actions. 1, if there are no concerns related to the blueprints and the exposure draft, please direct staff to submit the attached response, which is in attachment 2, to the AICPA on behalf of the board. Or, if concerns are noted, delegate authority to the board president to work with staff to finalize the response for submission to the AICPA. This concludes my presentation. I'd like to turn it back over to the President Savoy.
Thank you. Open for discussion. Ms. Owens.
I do have a few things that when I was reading through it, I wanted to maybe ask a clarifying question to see if the things I would have expected to be in certain bullets are covered maybe in more detail versus the exposure draft. And I know I mentioned this a little bit to staff. I have 4 things that I looked at when I went through it, and I'll bring them up just so we can decide if this needs to be incorporated. So the way that I wrote it, so forgive me, I have some of it online and some in paper. So on page 21.
Microphone.
Sorry. I keep turning my head to look at my binder. On page 21 of the exposure draft, the 3rd bullet, I'm curious when it says IT systems, does it also mean IT tools as well? Because there is a difference associated with that. So if that's a question that could be elaborated on in what we respond back. On page 46 of my materials, which would be page 23 of the draft, the 3rd bullet, it talks about sufficient and appropriate evidence, and it articulates that, but it doesn't articulate completeness and accuracy of the sufficient and appropriate evidence, which is key to anyone wanting to sit for the exam to understand. It may be implied, but it doesn't read that way. On the next one is the one around government accounting standards. Page 36. I was just going to ask if the comment that staff made on page 35 related to technical accounting and reporting topics be added to area 3 for accounting and state and local government, because I think it's relevant to that as well. And last one, page 39. It calls out specifically IT change management, and this may be covered by staff's comment around cybersecurity, but it doesn't articulate the other areas of the general controls that should be incorporated into that section. That's it.
When we say disagree, are we putting comments specifically as to why we disagree? Or we just generically say we don't agree? Yes.
So I do want to clarify. So I think that individuals are looking at attachment 3, which attachment 3 are the responses that were provided based on a survey from Nasba. So those are not staff comments, those are board comments. So I just want to make that clarification. In this particular exposure draft, we were not given a survey like this. We were given the questions that I provided you earlier and that are noted in your item. So we were given the questions about, does this cover the content that is expected of newly licensed CPAs to protect the public interest? So you don't have to make comments if you don't want to that specifically say you disagree. I also do want to provide just an elaboration that these are the blueprints, and they provide a specific purpose, which is a map to the test. They are not the only document that is developed by AICPA to build a test. There are other documents that are also developed, such as item writing guidelines, practice tests, that once those are developed may provide some of the answers and specificity that you provide. I think you'll have to make a determination if the comments and things that you suggested are things that cause you concern about the blueprints, or they are things that you just want to comment in terms of this isn't provided in enough detail, and you would suggest maybe expansion on detail?
It's more the latter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the thing that concerns me is there's a sample, more than a sample, it's a letter for my signature, which talks about us having to go for regulatory changes. And I want to make sure that we're all on board as to specifically what they're doing that's going to allow me to sign this and move forward for regulatory changes for us to adopt what they're proposing.
So the regulatory changes that are referenced in the draft letter, which is only a draft, references a regulatory package that was presented at the CPC this morning and that you are scheduled to hear tomorrow. For example, the regulatory change would include things like having to pass all 3 of the core sections and only 1 discipline section. That's an example of something that is included in the exposure draft that would require us to take regulatory action here in California.
Any other comments? Yes, Dan.
Thank you. Michelle, the survey seems to be replete with references to information technology and maybe some other computer-related issues. I'm looking, for instance, at Area 2, assessing risks and developing a plan response, bullet point number 3, understanding an entity's IT systems. And then I'm also looking at the statutory, which might be considered regulatory, definition of what a public accountant does. And so my question is the goal to test engineering of a computer, of how of how some sort of system is put together, coding, that sort of thing, or is the goal how to use it and how to use the computer, how to use the IT system, and that sort of thing to accomplish the goals of the CPA as we understand what he or she is now?
So I might attribute this to the wrong person, but I think it was President Savoy potentially who described the difference not in what a CPA does, but in how they go about doing it. In other words, in this day and age, CPAs have additional resources that they use to do their work, and those resources take the form of IT tools that they may use. It doesn't change the actual practice of accounting, but instead provides additional tools for CPAs to use. That I'm attributing to President Savoy, but I may have the wrong individual, but that described it in a way that I thought made a lot of sense.
Are the IT tools something that an engineer, a coder figures out, or are they, for instance, software programs that one has to understand how to use for a particular auditing, for instance, situation?
I mean,
Ms. Corrigan was the one for something that.
I'm trying to remember. You know, we talked about that some time ago. These new tools, using that term very generally, allow for auditors to process volumes of transactions with these big companies, you know, for the audit process to, you know, stratify, you know, I want to see transactions that fall within whatever the definition is. So an auditor isn't going to understand how you know, the clock works and how it goes together and anything, but it's looking for output so that they can define data he or she wants to see to perform a test, you know. So it's really the flow of information through that system, you know, and they're testing for accuracy and, you know, this was input, what was the output? So they're not just relying totally on, oh, I got this and here we go. No, the accuracy of what goes in and what comes out and what happens in the middle is very important too. So we're not going to all become a bunch of computer IT experts, but we're going to understand how the information goes in, comes out, and what happens to it. And we have the whole population to look at when we're doing our tests so that we're only testing from that population. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it's just so we've historically audited around the computer. We get information out. That's what we audit, around it. Now we're talking about auditing through the computer and gaining the expertise and knowledge of somebody other than an expert in computers that can now be called a CPA that can help us do that and do a better job of auditing. And auditing is a very serious business.
Is it when the flow in, through, out, is that understanding what a technical writer might explain as to how it's done? You make sure that it is that the flow does work correctly, or do you have to understand the coding or that type of thing?
Maybe I can help because I actually do this for a living. So realistically, no, you don't have to understand how the way the system is coded. So it's not a technical engineer, but you do have to understand the technology that is being used, right? So a transaction comes in, you understand the flow of the transaction, where the controls are in place, and now the system is most likely doing some of those controls. So understanding how the system is verifying something, verifying security, verifying that something matches with something else, and then testing that configuration in the system to make sure that it operates that way all of the time. So that's basically what I do. So that was my comment is around there is a difference between systems and tools and the level of detail in the exam to make sure those things are incorporated so people learn that, right? Because that's important for auditors to know now, especially in the world that we live in. So, but you don't have to be a coder. Nobody's really, I mean, where we're going from a technology perspective, we don't code anymore really. It's more or less basically leveraging functionality that is provided by a software company. It's just testing that on a regular basis.
So kind of which buttons to push, what button is supposed to do a particular thing,
mm-hmm. And
if it doesn't, then there's a problem?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions or comments regarding this presentation? Because, you know, we're evolving to the next level of the CPA exam. There's still core 3 tests that have to be passed, but you're allowing A, B, C, one of the other 3 to get your certification by allowing other folks within a career path, not necessarily as it's been dictated in the past, to change the evolution of what a CPA is and can strive to be, which is not specifically as it's been for the last, I don't know, 100 years, more. I think the CBA has been around, 1908? So it's been around forever, and this is, I won't call it a drastic change, but it's a change in a different direction to gain knowledge beyond what we presently have, and also as a springboard to other folks to enter the profession and carry a CPA license. All right. I guess I can sign the letter as it is. All right, thank you. Yeah. not necessarily asking for action, but I'd like to get a motion to approve the response by the staff to get back to the AICPA and approve this letter for my signature. Ms. Owens?
I'll make a motion to adopt staff's recommendation.
Nancy?
Yes, and I will second that motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion at the board? Any public comments for those in Sacramento? Moderator, please open it up for any public comments from anybody else.
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of a square, typically located bottom right corner of your WebEx screen. And the text field, type, I would like to make a comment. Make sure that it goes to all panelists and click send. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, and just as a matter of information, are there folks out there, moderator, that you're aware of?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Reed, call for a vote.
Evangeline Ward,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum,
Yes.
Ariel Pay,
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
and Nancy Corrigan.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Next item F, presentation regarding the process the National Association of State Board of Accountancies use for approving mutual recognition agreements. We have a special guest, Ms. Patricia Hartman, the Director of Client Services at Nasba. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. I must say your weather's much nicer here in Sacramento than it was in Nashville yesterday. So, as we're waiting for this to get started, just give you a little background on myself. I've been with NASBA since 2000. I've been involved with the International Qualification Appraisal Board for about 18 of those years, and work with the International Education Evaluation Service, also falls under my direction. Are you going to put up the presentation, or?
We're still waiting for
okay.
the moderator to
All right.
give us presentation.
President Savoy. Ms. Hartman is also the liaison for the CBT Administration Committee that I chair, and she's fantastic to work with.
Thank you. I have a couple of those, IQAB and then the Executive Director Committee. So I have a lot of things under me. Okay, thank you. Click at the top, right here. All right, great. Okay, so first off, I'll start talking about a little bit about US IQAB. It is a joint committee between the AICPA and NASBA. And its first meeting was held in February 23rd in 1993, so they've been around for a while. IQAB serves as a link between the United States accounting profession and other GATS countries. So that's one of the first requirements that when they look at someone, you have to be under the GATS. All recommendations of IQAB are provided to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, and then it goes before the NASBA Board of Directors and the AICPA Board of Directors. On the IQAB committee, we do have people representing academia and the profession, several staff people, a lot of attorneys involved looking at these things, the exam team, people who oversee CPE. So we're going to explain to you a little bit how we overlook everything that's involved in the profession. So we look at the State boards are discouraged, of course, from imposing any additional requirements on international applicants that they don't put on domestic, such as, requiring a social security number or things like that. We do encourage you to develop a pathway for international folks, and that could include, you set the qualifications the same as your domestic, but you want to apply it across the board without regard to what country it is. Let's see if I got the little... So what we do in evaluating other countries is the board should continue to evaluate your normal international. Say, like you have a person coming from China, you want to evaluate their education and compare it to domestic and not impose the same requirements you have on a domestic candidate. The only exceptions are for those that we've entered a mutual recognition agreement with. And there's about 8 of those countries right now. So I'll talk to you about the procedures. We have a consideration, the initial screening prerequisites, the prioritization, how we prioritize who we're going to look at, the review, the determination, and how we enter a mutual recognition agreement. I think one of the misnomers is people think this is a very quick process. It takes years for us to enter these. It's a lot of meetings, a lot of research that goes into it. What we look at is we want to know who's working at U.S. CPA firms. We want to know the demand. Who are these people who are actually going to seek the U.S. CPA credential based on their other credentials? State boards might be approached and asked to enter agreements. I think some of the first ones were for Canada that were based on approaching state boards of accountancy. And then we also have existing relationships. We already have an existing relationship with Canada. We may have developed one with Scotland and Ireland, so we make sure we leverage those between us and the AICPA. The initial screening prerequisites, they have to go through, I want to say it's about a 20-page questionnaire to start, and it's basically, we look at anything that's been ratified. We look at the scheduled commitments on market access. We look at the national treatment under the accounting service to make sure it's under GATS. And then we look at anybody who's part of IFAC. Is one of the things. It's not necessarily a requirement, but it will be facilitated. We prefer that. Now, we do pick and choose who we go after. It's a small committee, and it keeps getting smaller. It takes a lot of resources, both for staff at the ICPA and Nasba and from our volunteers. So we want to make sure they actually can qualify to be a U.S. CPA. So if their education is just so completely out of line with us, we're not even going to consider it. That's that first questionnaire that we do. We look at it and say there's no way they can possibly even come close to be substantially equivalent. Other criteria that we use, we want credentials that confer the ability to issue reports on financial statements. Basically, we want audit rights for audit rights. If you're not willing to give our U.S. CPAs going to your country audit rights, we don't want to bring your people in and give them the same audit rights that our domestic candidates have. The extent of demand, which I said that's going to come from U.S. firms. If Deloitte's sitting there saying we have just tons of people who are coming from Scotland and they're moving to the U.S., we want to get them, then we would look at those countries like that. We look at their published education, exam, and experience requirements. When I say education, I mean from K to 12 and then secondary education. Their examination, we have the AICPA exams team does a deep dive into whatever that examination is to obtain that professional credential in the other country. And then we look at their experience requirement. In most countries outside of the U.S., you're probably getting 120 hours of education, but their experience requirement is much higher than ours. So we're looking for substantial equivalency here. We look at their enforcement procedures. How do they take care of bad players? If they're not taking care of their bad players, we don't want them to send them to us. The court systems and the rules must be similar to those in the U.S. The estimated cost of the recognition is another thing we look at. The number of credential holders who are actually in the U.S., and then the professional body's potential as a party for mutual recognition. One of the things that we find is a lot of times we're dealing with the professional organization and not the regulator. So the professional organization has to make a commitment or undertaking to work with their regulatory body to get us audit rights. So U.S. CPA is going in to have audit rights. So then we review, we ask them to complete the questionnaire, which I said is very detailed on the procedures and requirements, and go through all of that, and then we complete it. Then we require everything in English, because like I said, the U.S. CPA exam is only available in English. Comprehension of the English language is an important part of accounting in the U.S. So then we evaluate the materials to determine if they have the education, examination, experience requirements similar to those that are required to become a U.S. CPA and are consistently and fairly required of all individuals holding that credential. So I said some people may hold a credential. I'll use South Africa they have the credential. They are a chartered accountant in South Africa, but they must become a registered auditor in order to have audit rights. So those are the things that we would potentially look at. And then we also consider their code of professional conduct, the culture, the business, the legal and economic environments. We do look at, is information sharing the norm, or are the copyright laws protected the same? So those are all the kind of, now you can see why we involve a lot of attorneys. So then we meet with appropriate individuals from those organizations, multiple times as necessary. They consult with different committees. We may go to the UAA committee. We may go to the CBT admin committee. We may go to the CPE committee. Also, anyone at that organization who's involved in it. So if you're going to ask questions about international education, then we would have the background for them to look at those and review them. And then we look at anything such as reports prepared by the World Bank, the American Bar Association, World Justice Project, and other organizations such as that. We, of course, archive all the appropriate documentation to support the decision on recognition. So if you ever need the background on how we got somewhere, we do have that information. Once we determine that we think that there should be a mutual recognition agreement, it's forwarded to the Nasba Board of Directors and to the AICPA Board of Directors. Upon approval, we publish that and distribute to the different bodies of the 55 jurisdictions. The recommendations are advisory. The majority of states do take them, but some states have additional requirements that they put on top of those. But what we want you to know is that you can rely on the work done by IQAB to say that this person is substantially equivalent, and the only thing they really need to do is take the IQEX exam. When we make the recommendations, they're very formal. Like I said, we present you at the MRA, and then we follow up and report to it, and we tell you what the path for licensure for those qualified individuals should be. All of them, regardless, we encourage all states not to. You have to have the IQEX exam. The requirement for that is across all 55 jurisdictions. We do require, in addition to that, these are outlined in every MRA. They've got to be a member in good standing. It means they can't have any disciplinary action against them. They have to meet the educational requirements outlined in the MRA. Those may differ from your 150 with 24 and 24 above introductory level. The exam requirements in the MRA are that they usually have passed an exam in their country and now are required to take the IQEX exam. And the experience requirements, a lot of times the majority of the people that we're dealing with have 5 years or more of experience. So these are not entry-level people coming in to try to get the U.S. CPA through these MRAs. And then they have to be in compliance with professional development and pass the IQEX exam. The reg portion of the uniform CPA exam is currently what we use for IQEX. Prior to a few years ago, we had one completely developed differently. We just determined that we were pulling the majority of the content was coming from the reg, so we adopted the reg. Each year, IQAB looks at the blueprints for reg to determine if it's still useful and meets their requirements as needed to make sure that it meets the requirements of the MRA. The applicants apply directly to Nasba. We determine, we issue them a notice to schedule the same way we do for domestic. They go in, they take that exam, schedule it per metric, and they complete it. After that, if they want to apply to your board, they have to come back to Nasba and get the grades forwarded to you. At that time, we make sure, again, it's got to be less than a year. They have to have a letter of good standing of a year or less, because we don't want them to have taken the exam and waited a year, have discipline action, and then we're forwarding you a score. So we do look at those for you. And just with that, I would just say, any questions, any concerns, anything I haven't addressed? It's a real quick one. I would just want people to be aware of how much work goes into doing these MRAs. So,
questions? Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate your being here.
No problem. Anytime. Thank you very much for having me.
Next, item G, discussion and possible action regarding reviewing applicants' recent peer review ratings as a condition of appointment, reappointment to serve on the California Board of Accountancy's Advisory Committee. Mr. Francella.
Thank you, President Savoy. Good morning, members. So for this item, the CBA is being asked to determine if it wishes to modify the recruitment review process for individuals seeking appointment to one of the CBA's advisory committees by having staff confirm individuals or their firm's peer review ratings. So the CBA maintains 3 standing advisory committees: the Qualifications Committee, the Enforcement Advisory Committee, and the Peer Review Oversight Committee. And on the bottom of page 1, and it continues on to the top of page 3, staff have provided information on the membership and the role of each of those committees. And on page 4, or pages 3 and 4, we've included information on peer review, including the types of peer reviews and associated peer review ratings. The CBA has maintained a peer review requirement since 2010, and it is an important tool of the CBA's consumer protection missions. Firms are required to undergo peer review. Firms that are required to undergo peer review do so at least once every 3 years as a condition for license renewal. And there are 2 types of reviews: system or engagement, depending on the type of service firms perform. System reviews are for the firms that perform audit engagements, and the scope of the system review is to test firms' system of quality control and provide the peer reviewer with a reasonable assurance that the accounting firm's system of quality controls are designed in accordance with professional standards and complied with by the accounting firm's personnel. Firms that perform other attest functions and compilations undergo an engagement review. During engagement reviews, peer reviewers look at a cross-section of an accounting firm's engagements to assess whether they are performed in conformity with professional standards. In both instances, firms receive a rating of pass, pass with deficiency, or substandard fail. The definitions for each is slightly different and have been outlined on pages 4 and 5 of the item. So as part of staff's present committee appointment review process, we verify that potential appointees have met the appropriate requirements for license renewal, including continuing education requirements, and peer review is subject. A check is also made to ensure there are no pending enforcement actions. And the peer review verification performed by staff that we presently perform consists of ensuring compliance with the peer review requirement, whether individuals are operating as a sole practitioner or within an accounting firm. The review does not include performing a review of the most recent rating received by those firms or that individual. So the question before the CBA is, does the CBA want staff to include a review of individuals or their firm's most recent peer review rating as part of the verification process? And on the bottom of page 5 and carrying on to the top of page 6, staff have listed some factors the CBA may wish to consider during its discussions. Some examples include many individuals for accounting firms with multiple owners, or many individuals work for accounting firms with multiple owners, shareholders, or partners. Peer review, and more specifically a system review, looks at a cross-section of the accounting firm work to determine if the system of quality control is suitably designed and is being followed. The peer review is not necessarily an indication of any individual's specific knowledge and understanding. Some individuals that apply are part of an accounting firm where they are not part of the accounting and auditing practice. They may work in the tax practice, consulting practice, etc. These are services that are not required to undergo peer review, nor undergo peer review, and the peer review rating the accounting firm receives would not provide insight into these individuals' knowledge and understanding. Based on the CBA's response to this question, though, regarding the implementation of verification process for peer review and its consideration of the various factors identified above, staff will update the verification process as necessary. While staff have no recommendation on this item, if the CBA does choose to move forward with this option, staff would suggest that any motion provides staff with flexibility to perform this review when it seems appropriate and raise any questions or concerns with the Vice President, who is obviously tasked with making recommendations to the CBA on appointments when necessary. So I would like to turn discussions back on this topic over to President Savoy, and I'll do my best to answer members' questions.
So before we open this up, I have a question. If we went this route, how much more time do you believe would be invested by staff to accomplish a more thorough review, whether it's the person or the firm?
I wouldn't say it would take considerable time. We have access to the facilitated state board access that the AICPA provides. The vast majority of firms are in there, so we'd be able to pull that information up. There might be some additional contact with CalCPA to make sure it's the most current, but I don't see it as being a significant time resource for staff.
Well, that's good. I mean, I wonder if anybody should be aware that we've had issues with some members of that committee that may have prompted this. Had we had this step in place, it might have facilitated our looking into those individuals that served on the committee. So, Nancy?
Well, yes, that has been an issue, not that we can get into those details, of course. And just for the members' benefit, the Qualifications Committee, those folks are looking at audit work papers. So they are auditor experienced, audit type experienced individuals, and it would seem that we would want them to come from, if they're a sole practitioner, they've had a peer review. If they were a part of a firm, we would want the firm to at least have performed well in peer review. The Enforcement Advisory Committee has kind of a range of, you can have tax experts, you can have forensic experts, you can have auditor accountant type. And it seems that if that is your background and what you bring to that advisory committee, that we would want to see a peer review. And that would be upon appointment, and I would say reappointment. And then as far as the peer review oversight committee, a knowledge to some degree of peer review, but they're not looking at work papers. That advisory committee is kind of oversighting the process. So a diligent professional with, a variety of backgrounds could do that. But if they come to you with an accounting auditing background, I would think there's nothing wrong with us asking to see their firm's recent peer review. Tax practitioners don't go through a peer review. Forensic folks don't at this point unless something changes down the line. So it's the auditors that are really going through. And it seems like if I want to apply for an advisory committee, maybe even a part of my application process, I submit it if it's applicable to me, and I should have no problem submitting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenbaum.
Yeah, I would actually second that, and particularly if it doesn't require a great deal of effort in order to check into this. But I will say that to me, even though when I was with a large firm and not personally subject to peer review, I believe that a successful peer review finding for the firm as a whole indicates a tone at the top. A cultural environment that I think would be very useful. I think if someone is working at a firm, even though they're not personally subject to peer review, but that firm is having an issue passing its review, that would indicate a cultural issue, and that's something we should identify and at least inquire about.
Thank you. Ms. Owens.
So I guess just to make sure that I'm following the discussion. So we're saying that somebody who volunteers to participate on the committee to do what basically that committee is being asked to do, if they work for a firm that has 40,000 different people and that firm gets a rating less than satisfactory, then we would not consider that candidate.
There's not a lot of firms that have 40 or 50,000 employees, so I'd say it would be the discretion of the staff, which we could add to our motion, not penalizing that one person out of 50,000 because the firm may have gotten a bad mark. So not generic across the board. I don't know how many volunteers we have that come from extremely larger firms. There are some, but that would be in the staff's discretion as part of our motion.
And also remembering or pointing out that a firm can have a pass with deficiency. And we're not talking about substandard that used to be called fail, but a pass with deficiencies. And it kind of depends on what those deficiencies are, because they just a full range. And so with staff and maybe the advisory committee chair and certainly the vice president being involved, using that discretion really is very important.
Ms. Hines.
So this feels very in the weeds, and I'm trying to just follow it, but it feels
overly broad, the requirement that this peer review request be made of anyone volunteering for all of the committees. I could understand if we were talking about the peer review oversight committee specifically, but to say that all of the committees require it from the way that I'm reading it and understanding it, it just feels a bit burdensome. And I know that we can't get into the details really of why this was raised by anyone, but the fact that there aren't details about really what the true concern is, these hypotheticals just feel like they are, talking about outlier circumstances rather than, identifying a real concern. Just recognizing what a challenge it has been to find accountants who are willing to volunteer their time to serve on these committees. I could see a potential candidate having some concern about being required to follow up on something that may not be related to their area, of specialty, or something that's outside of their department and their firm. And again, I'm a layperson, so, not getting into the details, but this just feels overbroad. It feels like a hammer in search of a nail, to me. And so I'm not completely convinced that this is a necessary requirement to impose.
First, thank you. I would suggest that as part of this, that not only would staff have the discretion to have this review done, and not only would staff have the discretion to get rid of someone because of the review, but that also that discretion would also lie with the vice president.
Ms. Corrigan.
Yes, and when I mentioned earlier, I did say that discretion for staff, also in consideration of the chair of the advisory committee, who also has input as to that appointment, as well as ultimately the vice president, and then it comes to the board. And then to address Ms. Hines, I believe what we were saying previously is that it would apply to those 3 advisory committees to the extent that it's applicable to that person and their background. In no way would we ever ask a tax professional to provide a peer review of their firm, because it has really nothing to do with what that tax professional is going to be doing on that committee. And it seems like it would be a mistake to only require it on the PROC, Peer Review Oversight Committee, because on the Qualifications Committee, those folks are auditors looking at auditing working papers. If they cannot pass their peer review appropriately, that's a real concern to me. Thank you.
Well,
yeah, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding exactly what the process would be of checking. If a person works for a firm that has undergone peer review, you have access to the information as to whether the firm passed with deficiency or failed, is my understanding. And separately, so that particular individual is not asked to provide anything else. It's simply you accessing some information and deciding whether it makes any sense to include it in your evaluation. And then I guess with respect to someone who is subject as an individual to a peer review process, you would likewise have access to that information. They wouldn't necessarily, again, need to provide anything for you. It's just simply another metric or another bit of information that you would use in order to determine whether that individual was appropriate to serve on one of these committees.
First.
Then I understand what's being said, and I understand that there's a difference in the kinds of professionals that serve on these respective committees. I just am uncomfortable with the notion that this would be performed after the person has submitted their application, if I'm understanding the process correctly. So what I might suggest then is that if we are going to add this additional step to identifying, to evaluating applicants, that it be included in the application. That, you know, in order for you to be appointed to this committee, you agree that staff, that the CBA will review the most recent peer review for your firm and evaluate it for appropriateness and then follow up with you. Because I think then it gives at least applicants the opportunity to determine whether they want to embark on that additional, you know, investigation of their background before they are being considered for the appointment. And an applicant may say, you know, that's not really something I wish to have happen. And so I'm going to pull my application. And I'm saying all this, like, again, I feel like we're getting into some like serious hypotheticals, and I feel a little bit like you know, it's implied like, hey, you know, it's a little bit of like, my colleague, Mr. Jacobson, frequently brings up due process, you know, concerns and questions, and it kind of feels a little bit to me like that. It feels like the applicant should be made aware in advance that there's this additional level of scrutiny. I'm not saying the scrutiny is wrong or is bad, but I feel uncomfortable with imposing that scrutiny unless there really is a compelling rationale for imposing that additional level of scrutiny.
So by adding that notice, so to speak, there might be a lot of self-elimination.
Again, like hypothetically, sure, there might be a lot of self-elimination. It might be give someone pause, not necessarily because they're concerned that their firm will have something that will cause them review, but just because they don't want to open the door to that additional scrutiny. And, you know, to me, an analogy is kind of like you don't use your work email address for, you know, serving on the Board of Accountancy, even though there's not anything wrong with it, but you would rather just keep them separate to a certain extent. Like, I think that the applicant should have the ability to opt in to give permission to that additional level of scrutiny, because you're not just looking at and evaluating the applicant, you're evaluating the applicant's employer, and they should be aware that that is something that's going to happen. It's kind of emerging for me now as I'm talking.
Ms. Ward?
I was thinking the same thing as Ms. Hines. The board I did serve, it was told up front, you will have an audit. And if you don't pass your audit for your CEs, now it opens the door for a fine and what happens. But I had the same thought. It is important, I think, to check to make sure that the firm they come from, they're doing well, but at the same time, to be respectful, because maybe that firm might feel like, hey, I don't want them to look into my business like that. And maybe next month, you might not be employed now because of what happened. So I do think that that's a concern to bring up as well. It is important to check, though. I don't know what happened in the past, but whatever happened, here we are now. But I think it's important to also consider the firm that's being looked at, how they might take that.
I have one more question or comment.
Yes.
But I'm trying to think if this is, and in mind, without understanding the objective of what we're trying to accomplish, it's hard to, because even if you work for a firm that has a couple thousand people, the report of the firm may not be indicative of that person. So it almost feels like, I mean, candidly, I wouldn't volunteer. I mean, I wouldn't. And because perhaps maybe not even an audit I worked on was picked as part of that year, right? I wasn't involved at all. And candidly, if I wasn't picked, I probably didn't know the peer review happened. So, I mean, I'm not 100% sure how this would help us make sure that me as a volunteer on this committee is able to perform the duties of that versus the way that I renew every year. I do my CPAs or CPEs. I could be audited to make sure that I'm doing what I should be doing from being, a good CPA. So I'm trying to connect the dots, but it's not connecting for me.
Ms. Corrigan?
I don't think in any way, I mean, at least I was never suggesting that we make this kind of a sneaky move and they don't know ahead of time. Certainly they should know. Part of the application process is you're going to, vet everything about me, what I've done, my background. Am I going to be a qualified representative of this board and serving on the advisory committee? Certainly by making sure they understand that if somebody really shouldn't be applying, that would save staff time by, gee, the firm has failed and failed and failed. Yeah, don't apply, don't waste anybody's time. I understand that. These reports are public. Any one of us can access them. We all know that. If we've done well on our peer review, we are proud to present that report. So it's not a matter of, not wanting to necessarily unless one hasn't performed well. And if we do decide to look at those peer reviewed reports, that includes a letter of comments. And in that letter of comments, the reviewer spells out the finding and also gives the firm the opportunity to respond. And, oh, yes, this has been corrected, or this is what we are doing to correct it. That's a very positive thing. And these concerns about an applicant and then the firm and what might have happened, this is where that subjective judgment, the judgment of staff, the chair, the vice president, come in to really analyze and say, well, gosh, this person wasn't even really involved in that. This is kind of what happened, because you don't want it to taint that individual. But we also don't want that individual to taint our advisory committees as well. Thank you.
Ms. Bowers.
So in no attempt to persuade the members one way or another, I did just want to maybe clarify part of the process now. If an applicant applies to one of our committees, we look at their individual continuing education, any enforcement background, but we also presently look at the employers and past employers for any disciplinary action that may have occurred. And if that is found to be present, it doesn't exclude that person from being considered. We just look further. We'll go back into the disciplinary action of the firm. We'll look to see if the applicant had any involvement. Did they work in that same office? Were they named in the accusation, or were they part of the investigation? So we do that presently, not only for our volunteer committees, but also for our board members who are licensees. When they're appointed to the board, that same process occurs, and it wouldn't necessarily be automatic. It would just be part of the consideration. So I just want to make sure members had that information as well.
Yeah, this is just another kind of checkbox on a list of qualifications to qualify for one of these advisory boards. And in the end, it would save us tremendous amount of potential embarrassment, because since this is all public record, for somebody to opine on somebody from a disciplinary function when that person may have been disciplined himself, it could put us in a rather embarrassing situation. First, Ms. Lara.
Just to jump in on the discussion here, I have a concern about, I understand that we're only talking about our CPAs to perform a test functions and that this is a requirement for them. But in the case where, let's say in one scenario, the firm has had a pass on their peer review, but the individual wasn't included in those audits, or on the other hand, where there was a pass for the firm, but they were, I think there could be an inequity there, because both of them are past individuals, but in one case, that person may have, not done a good job, but maybe their audits weren't chosen. So I'm just a little bit concerned on, there could be an inequity even if two individuals their firm has a pass, but maybe they were involved or they weren't. And, their poor, performance of something might not have been, enlightened in that sample of peer review chosen.
Also, keep in mind, once they get on committees, they are all evaluated based on their work on the committee, that if they got so far as to be on the committee and were a poor performer, that would come to the attention of the vice president and the other members to maybe do something about that. So I don't think anybody's slipping through the cracks one way or the other. Ms. Hines, you have one more comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say that all sort of reinforces my point about this feels like it's not necessary. I mean, while I can hear the explanations for how it could resolve an issue, it just sounds, based upon the discussion that we're having, that again, we're talking about something, an outlier of a circumstance. And when you're weighing the impact that it could potentially have on discouraging or causing an applicant to potentially second guess their interest and desire in volunteering, I think the risk of that is being articulated of a problem happening or slipping through the cracks is outweighed by the potential impact on the volunteer candidate pool that is already fairly limited, and which it sounds like is generally comprised of more than qualified individuals. And, so again, feeling like this is not necessary, at this time.
Mr. Franzella, I know you wanted, it was already taken care of. Okay. Mr. Rosenbaum.
One last question. Under the current evaluation system, is there a prohibition against staff looking at information that is already within the room?
No. And that's where the discretion also comes in. If there's something that they see that they want to go a little bit further, they always have that right. So there's no prohibition. And again, I think it's just another checkbox on a questionnaire for the staff to look at. And if for some reason they find it not necessary, not applicable. I'd like to get a motion then for what we're discussing so we can move this along.
I'd like to make a motion that we allow the staff to consider peer review ratings of the individual and the individual's firm when evaluating candidates for our advisory committees.
Thank you. Ms. Corrigan?
Yes, I will second that motion. Thank you.
Any further discussion at the board? Mr. Jacobson?
By saying that we're allowing it here, may by implication mean that we're not allowing some other factor in some other situation. It seems like if we just leave it alone, the staff and the vice president will continue to have discretion to look at this issue anyways. So it seems like we should there would be no change, except that we might, if we allow this, if we affirmatively allow this, by implication we might be accidentally disallowing something else.
Thank you. Any public comment in Sacramento? Any moderator open it up? Any public comment outside?
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. Instructions are on the screen. If you would like to participate, click on that question mark inside of a square, typically lower right corner of your WebEx screen. And in the text field type, I would like to make a comment, and make sure it goes to all panelists and click send. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Ms. Reed, call for the vote.
Dee Owens,
No.
Ariel Pay, Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Carrie-Ann Farrell Hines,
No.
Dan Jacobson,
No.
Christian Lotta,
No.
Evangeline Ward,
No.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum,
Yes.
And the motion did not carry.
Thank you. It's a written report only. Item H. Item I, update, discussion, and possible action on legislation which California Board of Accountancy has taken a position. Mr. Ibarra.
Thank you, President Savoy. Good afternoon, members. I'm Patrick Ibarra, Information and Planning Officer with the CBA. Of all the bills that the CBA has reviewed and taken a position on, the 4 bills listed on the agenda were sent to the governor, and I want to provide an update on those. AB 1604 by Assemblymember Holden is regarding civil service and the Upward Mobility Act of 2022. The CBA adopted a watch position on this bill. It was approved by the legislature, signed by the governor, and will take effect on January 1st, 2023. SB 731 by Senator Durazo is regarding criminal records and relief. At the July meeting, the CBA changed its position from a watch to an oppose unless amended position due to the concerns that this bill would limit the CBA's ability to consider financial felony crime convictions for CPA licensure applicants. Despite staff efforts, the author's office did not respond to requests for a meeting or amendments. The bill passed the legislature on August 26, 2022, and is now on the governor's desk. A veto request letter was submitted to the governor on the CBA's behalf. SB 1387 by Senator Limón is regarding gubernatorial appointments and its report. The CBA took a support position on the March 10, 2022 version of SB 1387, which was more expansive, requiring the establishment of a working group by the governor's office. However, in mid-August, the legislature significantly amended the bill to eliminate this working group and instead require by December 1st of each year, the governor's office create a report containing demographic information for each gubernatorial appointment and serving appointees, a list of each board and commission and its stated objective, as well as any membership openings during the prior year. This bill passed the legislature on August 31st and is currently on the governor's desk. The CBA has submitted a letter reflecting the CBA's support based on the March 10th version. The current version, although scaled down, continues efforts that the CBA has previously supported. Staff recommend the CBA maintain its support position on the August 25th version of SB 1387. No action is needed unless the CBA wishes to change its position. SB 1443 by Senator Roth is regarding an extension of sunset review dates of specified boards, bureaus, and commissions within the Department of Consumer Affairs for an additional year, from January 1st, 2024 to January 1st, 2025. This extension would also apply to the authority for designation of an executive officer. The CBA adopted a support position on this bill, which passed the legislature on August 30th and is currently on the governor's desk. The CBA has submitted a letter requesting the governor's signature of this measure. It should be noted that any bill which remains on the governor's desk without his veto at the end of the month will become law without any further action on his part. I will now turn it back to President Savoy for any questions or discussion.
Any board comments, discussions regarding this topic? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Item J, discussion of possible action to modify the composition of the consideration of the CPA Experience Task Force and confirmation of the appointment. We had a member of the CERT committee had resigned, and I had recommended and temporarily appointed Mr. Michael Williams, CPA, to the CERT committee. So what we're asking for is affirmation of that appointment that I made to the CERT committee. I can go through all the qualifications of the CERT committee, but I think we've been through this before. So in the interest of time, I make a motion to ratify my appointment of Mr. Williams. I'll need a second and then a vote, please.
I'll second.
Ms. Hines.
I was going to second.
Thank you. Any further discussion of the board? Any public comments in Sacramento? Moderator, please open it up for any other public comments.
The Q&A is now open. Instructions will be on the screen. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of a square, type "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. Just a friendly reminder to please mute your microphones to avoid any of the echoing, and that's for the members in the conference room. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Reed, call for the vote.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens,
Yes.
Ariel Pay,
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Evangeline Ward,
Yes.
and Nancy Corrigan.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Last item under this agenda, letter K, is a Department of Consumer Affairs Director's Report on departmental activities. I believe we're doing this via WebEx. Mr. Greg Pruden, the Manager of the Legislative Affairs. Moderator, if you allow him in to give his report.
Good morning, Chair, members, and staff. I hope everybody can hear me well. Thank you for allowing me an opportunity to provide the Department of Consumer Affairs update. My name is Gregory Pruden, and I'm a Legislative Manager with the Department's Division of Legislative Affairs. Social Media Brown Bag. On August 10th, DCA held a brown bag meeting on the topic of social media. The presentation included an overview of social media best practices, content examples, security, and more. A copy of the presentation was provided to participants. If you have any questions or requests related to social media, please contact the department's Deputy Director of Communications, Monica Vargas. Apprenticeship Brown Bag. On October 5th, DCA is hosting a brown bag meeting with representatives from the Division of Apprenticeship Standards and its Interagency Advisory Committee on Apprenticeships to discuss apprenticeship programs as they relate to professions and occupations under the department. This will be an opportunity for boards to hear about these programs and processes and provide input on how they might relate to or being impacted by board licensing requirements. DCA Workforce and Succession Plan. The department takes a proactive and strategic approach to the recruitment and training of its skilled and diverse workforce. To achieve this approach, DCA is updating its annual workforce and succession plan. As part of this process, the department recently requested that board and bureau leaders complete a workforce survey. Responses will be used with other information about DCA's workforce to inform decisions that align and support DCA's new strategic plan. Additionally, this process facilitates meeting CalHR's requirement that all state organizations with civil service employees maintain current workforce and succession plans. New department staff. DCA is pleased to announce that Olivia Trejo has been appointed as the department's chief of the Office of Human Resources as of August 1st. Olivia has over 22 years of human resources experience in state government, and the last 9 years have been with the department's Office of Human Resources. She began her career in 2000 at the Department of Insurance, then the Department of Real Estate, and most recently as the department's Assistant Human Resources Chief for the past 5 years. Taylor Schick was appointed the department's Chief Fiscal Officer in July. Taylor has more than 16 years of state service experience, all with the department. Taylor began his career in 2006 as a budget analyst and most recently served as the department's budget officer. As the new DCA Chief Fiscal Officer, Taylor will lead the dedicated accounting and budget teams. Additionally, the governor recently appointed a new Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Relations, Melissa Gear. She will be joining the department in October and brings a wealth of experience. She previously served as the Chief Deputy Legislative Director at the Department of Insurance since 2014. She also served at the California State Teachers Retirement System, California Attorney General's Office, and the Legislative Analyst's Office. She earned a Master of Public Health and Administration degree from New York University. We look forward to her joining the department and assisting all of our boards and bureaus. Board Leadership Meeting. DCA will be holding its fall board leadership meeting on October 11th. These quarterly meetings are attended by board presidents, vice presidents, executive officers, and DCA executive leaders, and provide the opportunity to discuss important and emerging issues as a group. If you have any suggested agenda items for this upcoming meeting, please send them to the DCA Member Relations email. Final 2022 Board Member Orientation Training. Lastly, board members are required to complete BMOT, Board Member Orientation Training, within 1 year of appointment and reappointment. The final training of this year will be offered on October 12th. Members can register through DCA's Learning Management System. BMOT is required for all newly appointed and reappointed members, but is available as a refresher for all members and executive officers. Please reach out to Board and Bureau Relations with any questions. As always, the department is here to help. If there's anything we can do to assist, please reach out. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pruden. Any questions? Thank you very much. I appreciate it. At this point,
thank you, Chair.
Let's take our morning break. It's 11:10. Be back at 11. I'm sorry, it's 11:20. Be back at 11:35. Thank you. Okay, welcome back.
This
Next
is the
item on the
moderator.
agenda.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to click on that record button. It's going to make a loud announcement. Didn't want to interrupt you there.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. Next item is the report of the Vice President. I guess I'll do that. This item is to recommend the reappointment of Timothy Jones, CPA, to the Qualifications Committee. The Qualifications Committee assists the CBA in its licensure activity by reviewing the experience of applicants for licensure and making recommendations to the CBA. This includes conducting work paper reviews with the applicant or the employer present to verify that the responses provided are reflective of the requisite experience for the licensing person. Vice President Salazar conferred with the CBA executive officer to verify that that individual has met the appropriate requirements for a license renewal and has demonstrated the skills and knowledge to continue serving as a member of the Qualifications Committee. So can I please get a motion to reappoint Timothy Jones, CPA, to the Qualifications Committee effective October 1, 2022 through September 30th, 2024. Ms. Owens? Thank you.
To reappoint Mr. Jones to the committee.
Mr. Pei?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion at the board? Any public comment from those in Sacramento? Moderator, any public comment from anybody else?
This is the moderator. The Q&A is now open. Instructions are on the screen for your reference. Again, gentle reminder, please mute your microphones for those persons. Thank you. Or else it will do the echo. Click on the question mark inside of the square, type I would like to make a comment, send it to all panelists. If you would like to participate in public comment and are logged into WebEx. I see no requests submitted. Would you like me to turn off the Q&A feature?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Reed, call for vote.
Dee Owens,
Yes.
Ariel Pay,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes.
Evangeline Ward,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
and Joe Rosenbaum.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. That concludes the Vice President's report. Now on to the Secretary Treasurer. Oh, not here. She has no report to give today, so thank you for that. Next item 5, report of the Executive Officer, Ms. Bowers. First item is the presentation of the California Board of Accountancy Annual Report. Ms. Pierce.
Thank you. We are still finalizing the annual report. It's actually with the Department of Consumer Affairs undergoing the final formatting and design, and I had hoped we'd be able to present it today, but we're going to email it out after the meeting once we get the final draft in, and then we will do the formal adoption of the report at the November board meeting, and there will also be time to receive any comments or feedback or any edits from the members at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Pierce will do the Administrative Division report.
Thank you. Just want to highlight a couple of items. The board is making great progress on its rulemaking packages. The fee increase was approved. It goes into effect October 1st. Our resubmittal for the definition of satisfactory evidence is under review by the Office of Administrative Law. The CE changes is open for public comment. That closes, I think, October 4th. The second signature, removing the second signature from the attest experience form, is under review by the DCA Executive Office, and we will likely have 2 additional rulemaking packages to add to this list after today's meeting. In staffing updates, we are exploring the use of an HR firm to assist with recruitment activities for the ICPA vacancies, hoping that will generate some more interest. We've also expanded our use of social media to advertise for other CBA vacancies. Mr. Ibarra will talk about a job fair we recently attended during his outreach report. We continue to receive positive feedback on the new Cba Connect online license renewal system. Since the launch of the survey, 77% of respondents said they had a good or excellent experience submitting their renewal application using Cba Connect. That concludes my report. I'll turn it back to the president. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you for that report. Next item is the update on the California Board of Accountancy's communications and outreach. Mr. Ibarra.
Thank you, President Savoy. I'd like to begin with a big thank you to everyone who was involved in the virtual outreach event the CBA hosted last month. The Future of the Accounting Profession happened on August 29th, and we had more than 450 people watching over the course of the evening. President Savoy gave a presentation and also took part in a panel with 3 other well-respected members of the accounting community, including Cal CPA President and CEO Denise Fremming. We appreciate the help Cal CPA provided in informing its membership about the event. CBA Enforcement Chief Dominic Franzella presented about the role of the enforcement program, and License Renewal and Continuing Competency Unit Manager Sarah Benedict gave an overview of Cba Connect. The evening was hosted by David Hempel from our information and planning staff. Of the attendees, more than 360 viewed the event for at least 45 minutes, with more than 320 watching for over an hour. In other words, most of them found our information interesting enough to stick around for most, if not all, of the program. Our audience was international, too. We had 2 viewers in Japan, 1 in Thailand, and 2 in Canada. We're worldwide now. It began at 7:30 in the morning in Thailand, so I admire that individual's commitment. Our latest podcast episode went live earlier this week. The 5th episode of the Accounting for California podcast features CBA managers Suzanne Gracia and Ms. Benedict talking all about CBA Connect, its benefits, why licensees should sign up for it before their license expiration date, and what enhancements are being looked into for the online renewal system. All 5 episodes can be accessed from the podcast page of the CBA website. Our own executive officer, Patty Bowers, was featured in the August eDigital newsletter, Nasba's monthly publication for executive directors. She gave a great interview about her love for Sacramento, her love for her grandkids, her career path leading to executive officer, and some of her favorite vacation spots. Considering that I'm always on the lookout for excellent pizza, but unfortunately the commute is a bit far from Sacramento, Ms. Bowers shared where her favorite is from. Unfortunately, no spoiler alerts from me. You'll have to read the article to know where that is. In fact, I encourage you to read the interview when you have the chance if you haven't already. That's my phone. Thanks, Siri. Glad you did. Surveys can be a useful tool in gathering important information, and we created and deployed 2 surveys recently. The first was to aid the consideration of CPA Experience Requirements Task Force to collect data valuable to its decision-making process. More than 3,300 individuals participated in the survey and shared their opinion about the attest experience requirement. A second survey is provided to licensees after completing license renewal using Cba Connect. We want feedback from those who just went through the process to share about their renewal experience and any suggestions for an improvement they might have. The CBA has received actionable responses in just the few months the survey has been active, which we are using to consider future enhancements for the system. Now that in-person events are happening again around California, the CBA is being invited to participate in job fairs. CBA Administration Unit Manager Christy Abate locally attended the Tri-County Job Fair back in August. Being present at these events is a great way to help fill job openings with the CBA, but it's also a good opportunity to shed light on what the CBA does. The CBA social media pages saw higher than average growth over the summer months. The CBA Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn profile gained 215 followers in August alone, the first month with more than 200 growth since September of 2020. LinkedIn specifically saw its highest single month growth ever in August. We think that the advertising for the August outreach event had a lot to do with its increases and is further proof the more active you are on social media, the more people will interact with you. That concludes my presentation on this agenda item. I'll now turn it back over to President Savoy.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? Thank you for that report. Appreciate it. Next, the committee advisory board. No enforcement advisory committee. So, Qualifications Committee, Mr. Williams.
Good morning, President Savoy and members of the board. I am Michael Williams, Chair of the CBA's Qualifications Committee, or QC. The QC held its meeting at the CBA headquarters on July 27, 2022. I'd like to thank CBA member Yen Tu for attending our meeting and providing an overview of the CBA's activities from the March, May, and July 2022 CBA meetings. At our meeting, the QC discussed and approved the January 2022 meeting minutes. The QC reviewed and approved the 2023 meeting dates. I will present the proposed dates under the next agenda item. Since April 2022, the QC has held 2 subcommittee meetings to conduct interviews with employers and applicants to review work papers and to test experience. The subcommittee meetings reviewed a total of 11 Section 69 rules, reviews, and 6 personal appearances. 13 applicants were recommended for approval of a CPA license with the attest authority, and 4 applicants were deferred. Lastly, Chief Michelle Center led a discussion regarding providing input to the CBA's CPA Experience Requirements Task Force on the necessity and sufficiency of the attest experience requirements for CPA licensure. Information regarding this discussion was presented to the task force members at the September 15, 2022 meeting. Before moving on to the next agenda item, I'd like to turn this back over to President Savoy, and we'll be happy to answer any questions the members may have.
Any questions, any comments? Thank you. Do we need to vote on your meeting dates, or you're going to go through that now?
That's the next item.
Okay, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to the CBA agenda item, the QC approved the following proposed 2023 meeting dates: January 25th, April 26th, July 26th, and October 25th. The QC recommends that the CBA adopt or modify the proposed 2023 QC meeting dates. This concludes my report. At this time, we'll turn it back to President Savoy, and we'll be happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting dates? Ms. Hines?
Move to approve the meeting dates.
Mr. Jacobson?
I second that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Any public comments from those in Sacramento? Moderator, any public comments from the public?
This is a moderator. The Q&A is now open. Instructions are on the screen. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, type I would like to make a comment, and send it to all panelists. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A feature?
Yes, please. Ms. Reed, call for vote.
Christian Lada,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Evangeline Ward,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum,
Yes.
Ariel Pay,
Yes.
and Dee Dee Owens.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Appreciate your commitment to service. Next item is the Peer Review Oversight Committee report. Mr. DeLizer.
Good morning. My name is Jeff DeLizer. I'm the chair of the Peer Review Oversight Committee, or PROC. Our PROC held its meeting here at the CBA headquarters on August 12th. And I would like to thank CBA member Ms. Ward for attending our meeting and providing an overview of the CBA's activities from their May and July 22 CBA meetings. The PROC discussed and provided feedback regarding its May 22 meeting minutes, but we were unable to approve them as they needed further review. And so those will be brought back to our committee in December at our next meeting. The PROC also reviewed and approved the 2023 PROC meeting dates, which I'll present under the next agenda item. Members have engaged in several oversight activities since I last reported to you about our May 22 meeting. Members attended 9 report acceptance body meetings and found that all of those met the CBA's expectations. Members attended the Cal CPA Peer Review Committee meeting. PROC members also reviewed 2 out-of-state administering entities, the Georgia Society of CPAs and the Coastal Peer Review, Inc. Georgia Society administers the peer review program for the state of Georgia, and Coastal administers the peer review program for the states of Maryland and North Carolina. Both of those administering entities were found to be in compliance in all material respects with the rules established by the AICPA and the CBA. As a standing item, PROC members also discussed notices posted on the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the National Association of State Boards of Accountancies websites regarding any changes or updates to the peer review program. The PROC also reviewed 2 AICPA reports on oversight, the NPRC's report and the general report on oversight from February and April of 22. And last, Chief Center led a discussion regarding providing input from our committee to the CBA's CPA Experience Requirements Task Force, or CERT, regarding the necessity of the attest experience requirements for CPA licensure. Information related to that discussion was presented last week at the CERT meeting on September 15th. Our next PROC meeting will be held on December 9th of 22. I'd like to go ahead and turn the discussion back over to President Savoy if there are any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? No.
I will continue on to the next item. At our August 12th meeting, the PROC members approved the proposed 2023 PROC meeting dates, which are included in the materials. And the PROC recommends that the CBA adopt or modify those proposed meeting dates. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions? Can I get a motion? Ms. Hines.
To adopt the meeting dates as presented.
Thank you. Sla?
I second that motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Public comments, Sacramento. Moderator, open up for public comments elsewhere.
Moderator, the Q&A is open. Instructions are on the screen. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark, type I would like to make a comment, and send it to all panelists. No requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Please. Ms. read, call for vote.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes.
Evangeline Ward,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum,
Yes.
Ariel Pay,
Yes.
and Dee Dee Owens.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. DeLizer. Appreciate your commitment to service. Next item, 7, report of the enforcement chief, Mr. Francella.
Thank you, President Savoy. So the activity report before members today is for the entire fiscal year of 21-22. So beginning on pages 1 and 2, the CBA received over 4,400 complaints last fiscal year. The graph on the bottom of page 1 provides a comparison of the total complaints received as of the same time, so the same full reporting period of the prior 2 fiscal years. You'll see that when compared to the 19-20 fiscal year, we received about 92% more complaints. And then compared to 2021, about just over 60%. On page 2, members will see information on complaints received. We are just highlighting the top 3, including the total number of complaints for each type and the associated percentage the complaint type is to the whole of the various complaints received. So moving on to investigations and investigations pending. Staff closed just over 3,100 cases, with 98% of those cases closed within 1 year. The average days to close investigations was 97, which was 97 days, which is down from the prior fiscal year. Enforcement had a pending case inventory of just over 2,100 cases. This is a significant increase over where we were when we closed last fiscal year. However, this is due largely to the influx in the overall number of complaints received. There was only 1 case over 24 months, and it is actively being investigated. Again, there was one on the graph in the investigations pending in the cases of 21 to 24 months. For fiscal years 19, 20, and 2021, I apologize for an error in there. We are working to get that calculation fixed. But for 1920, there were actually 32 cases, not 47. And for 2020, 2021, it was, for that same category, 12 cases, not 33. And members will see that the average days for open investigations is sitting at 57 days, which is down considerably compared to the prior fiscal year. Discipline-related information can be found on page 4 of your report. Looking first at AG referrals, the CBA referred 34 matters to the AG and have filed 30 pleadings, with the vast majority of those being accusations. The CBA only has 32 matters pending at the AG's office at this time, and the CBA took action on 32 disciplinary orders, with the vast majority of those being stipulated settlements. As for citation, on page 5, the CBA issued 459 citations. Nearly 70% were for the 20 and 12 violation. We did receive 74 citation and fine appeals. We withdrew or modified 51 of those citations and upheld 12 during that period of time. Moving on to unlicensed activity on page 6. The CBA received just over 2,300 complaints regarding unlicensed activity, and when you compare that to the prior fiscal years, I believe the percentages work out to almost 1,500% more compared to 19 and 20, and nearly 400% for 2021. But I would like to note the vast majority of those complaints, about 95%, are in one category and are coming from one individual who's filing these complaints. And during that last fiscal year, we closed 754 investigations, with the vast majority of those being the result of compliance. The final area of your report I'd like to highlight is on page 7, relating to probation monitoring. we had 120 individuals at the close of the fiscal year, and we had identified 70 probation violations, with the vast majority of those being cost reimbursement and submitting quarterly written reports. Those tend to go together because they are due at the same time, so it's a common occurrence. So at this time, I'd like to turn discussions back over to President Savoy, and I'll do my best to answer members' questions.
So of these 95 by one, is he some type of vigilante that's finding people that are performing so-called CPA services that don't have a license?
I'll be careful on how I can respond to that, but it is one individual. It is mainly about advertising or use of the CPA designation, and a lot of it stems from CPA not meaning just CPA for Certified Public Accountant. In other countries, it stands for Chartered Public Accountant, and it gets even more complicated when the abbreviation for that country is also CA. So we get a lot of information around that. Some of it is accurate, some of it is not. So we have to, but we treat each case on a case-by-case basis, evaluate it, and we have kind of not a matrix, but a process to evaluate them as efficiently and as effectively as possible.
Okay. Any other questions or comments regarding this report? Thank you, Mr. Francella. Since we have some more time before lunch, I'd like to move forward with the agenda. Let's go first to item 10, report of the licensing chief. Ms. Center, thank you for being ready.
Thank you. The Licensing Activity Report, or LAR, covers the entire fiscal year of July 1, 21 to June 30th, 2022. Included in the report is the Nasba Uniform CPA Examination Performance Summary for the second testing quarter of 2022. If you turn to page 2 of the LAR, we have responded to over 125,000 stakeholder inquiries in the form of emails and telephone calls. That is significantly less than the prior year. This decrease may be due to the launch of Cba Connect, and I personally would like to think it is also due to the fact that we are processing within our 30 days for both exam and initial licensing. So turning to page 3, the examination unit has approved nearly 19,000 applicants to sit for the CPA exam. The initial licensing unit has approved close to 4,000 applications for CPAs and firms. Both units are processing below the 30-day goal. On pages 5 through 7, data related to renewal deficiencies and continuing education audits are included. Table 7 includes CE audit data. As of June 30th, 697 of the 877 audits completed in 21-22 were found to be compliant. 31 audits had identified deficiencies that were resolved. 9 still have outstanding deficiencies. 39 were referred to enforcement for noncompliance. Table 8 includes population data. As of June 30th, the CBA had a grand total of 114,579 licenses, registrations, and permits. On page 9, data related to military and refugee, asylee, and special immigrant visa holders are included. Table 10 lists military and refugee applications received and approved. Military and refugee applications are being processed on average in 3 days. So that concludes my presentation. I turn it back over to you, President Savoy.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Moving ahead to item 11. Nobody has anything to say. Item 11, meeting minutes. I need approval. So can I first get a motion to adopt the minutes of July 21st, 2022 California Board of Accountancy meeting, specifically agenda item 11A, which includes non-substantive edits, which were noted after the materials were received? Owens?
I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobson?
I second that motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Ms. Hines?
I just had a question for council. Do I have to abstain even though I wasn't here? Because I did review the minutes and we're just adopting them. So
you do not have to abstain if you feel reasonably educated in order to make a vote on the motion.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Any public comments from those in Sacramento? Moderator, any public comments from those wherever?
Q&A is now open. Instructions are on the screen. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, type I would like to make a comment, and send it to all panelists. No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. Ms. Reed, call for a vote.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Evangeline Ward,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens,
Yes.
Ariel Pay,
Yes.
and Joe Rosenbaum.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Next, can I get a motion to accept the minutes, specifically agenda item 11B through 11D, which includes any non-substantive edits that were noted after the materials were received? Ms. Hines?
So moved.
Thank you. Mr. Pay?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Any public comments from those in Sacramento? Moderator, please open it up for any public comments for anybody else.
The Q&A is open. Instructions are on the screen. Click on that question mark inside of the square, type I would like to make a comment, and send it to all panelists. And no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. Ms. Reed, call for a vote.
Evangeline Ward,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum,
Yes, with respect to 11B, abstain for 11C and D.
okay, Ariel Pay,
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes for items B and C, abstain for item D.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
and Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
and the motion carries.
Thank you. Moving ahead to item other business, number 12. No report on 1A, no report on 1B, no report on B1, no report on B2, no report on 3A. Ms. Corrigan was a written report because she was not going to be here tomorrow. Do you want to say anything at all about that, or just leave it as is? Thank you. No report on 3C. So we move to item 4, discussion approval of staff responses to NASBA's focus questions. Ms. Pierce.
Thank you. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the California Board of Accountancy an opportunity to review and comment on proposed responses to the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, or Nasba, Regional Directors Focus Questions. The questions and proposed responses have been provided in the item's attachment. NASBA has informed staff that it uses the focus questions to help NASBA regional directors stay apprised of each state's policies and procedures and to see where improvements or adjustments might be made. The 8 regional directors will review the focus questions during their September regional conference calls and will discuss responses received during the regional breakout sessions at the NASBA annual meeting, which is being held October 30 through November 2nd in San Diego, and then present their findings to NASBA. The proposed responses to the NASBA focus questions were prepared by staff throughout the board. Staff recommend that the CBA approve the proposed responses and provide any edits or additional information members may wish to include. And I'll turn it back over to the president.
Any discussion? I believe you're asking for a request to review and approve.
Approve, yes.
Approve.
A motion for approval.
Do I have a motion? Ms. Hines?
Move to approve.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobson?
I second that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Any public comment? Sacramento? Moderator? Anybody else?
Moderator, the Q&A is now open. Instructions are on the screen. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, type "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. No requests. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Thank you. Ms. Reed, call for a vote.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens,
Yes.
Ariel Pay,
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Evangeline Ward,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
and Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Plenty of time. Moving ahead to item 13, report on the Committee of Professional Conduct and consideration of the CPA experience. The report of the professional CBC this morning. Ms. Owens.
Hot off the presses. Okay, give me 1 second. All right. At the September CPC meeting, CBA Licensing Chief Michelle Center provided an overview of the early entry and CPA evolution licensure model topics that pertain to the regulatory package before you today. Ms. Center shared that the Business and Professions Code Section 1593.5 established early entry in January of this year and noted that applicants are now able to sit for the CPA exam prior to meeting the educational requirements. At its July meeting, the board discussed early entry to the CPA exam and board directed staff to include the following 3 items in the rulemaking package. First, a certificate of enrollment documenting college university enrollment, degree conferral, and courses that are in progress. 2, submission of transcripts and/or foreign credential evaluations at the time of early entry application that document the finished coursework and degree conferral if graduated. And third, revocation of exam credit for applicants who fail to submit satisfactory evidence within 240 days of application submission unless they can provide evidence substantiating a reason consistent with those outlined in CCR Section 7.1. In relation to the CPA evolution licensure model, Ms. Center directed the CPC to the California Code of Regulations that establishes the uniform CPA exam prepared by the AICPA as the CPA licensure exam in California. She also presented on the CPA exam changes based on the CPA evolution licensure model that is scheduled to launch in January of 2024. Under the new model, all applicants will be required to pass 3 core exam sections and 1 discipline, as was discussed during the agenda item 2E. Ms. Center also provided a summary of the changes in each of the sections of the California Code of Regulations that is proposed to be amended, repealed, or created as documented in attachments 1 and 2. The CPC recommends that the CBA first rescind the CBA's November 2018 motion and prior proposed text for CCR Section 7.1. 2, approve the proposed regulatory language presented in Attachment 1. 3, approve the proposed COE-1 presented in Attachment 2. Also direct staff to submit the text and form to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business and Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review. If no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all the steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking package and make any non-substantive changes to the package and set the matter for hearing if one is requested. And lastly, if no adverse comments are received within the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, Authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking to amend CCR Section 6, 7.1, 8.2, 9.2, and adopt proposed regulations at CCR Section 7.3 and 5.3 and repeal CCR Section 13 as noticed. This is a fully formed motion and does not require a second. I will turn it back to President Savoy for a discussion and a vote.
Thank you. That was a mouthful. Any further discussion on this matter? Any public comment from Sacramento? Moderator, any public comment from the public?
The Q&A is open. The instructions are on the screen for your reference. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark inside of the square, type I would like to make a comment, and send it to all panelists. No request. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please. Ms. Reed, call for a vote.
Nancy Corrigan?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Dan Jacobson?
Yes.
Christian Lotta?
Yes.
Dee Dee Owens?
Yes.
Ariel Pay?
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
And Evangeline Ward?
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Next item.
All right, moving on to agenda item 3. CBA Enforcement Chief Dominic Franzella provided an overview of the rulemaking to adopt regulations regarding the sale, transfer, or discontinuance of a licensee's practice. The CBA previously heard this item at its January 2017 meeting and approved proposed regulatory text to provide increased consumer protections regarding client notification and maintaining the confidentiality of any client files the licensee possesses when the licensees are selling, transferring, or discontinuing practice. The CBA also conducted a public hearing on the proposed regulations on September 16, 2021. Over the course of the public comment period, the CBA received comments from more than 70 individuals. Comments included objection to the 7-year retention period, method of notification, concerns with the 90-day notice period to wait for clients' objections, and concern regarding notice to clients impacting value of practice. The CBA approved a motion to withdraw the initial rulemaking package in January 2022. Since then, staff have been working in collaboration with DCA to revise the proposed regulatory language and have discussed proposed changes with Cal CPA. The regulatory text being proposed addresses many of the concerns raised in the comments and incorporates changes to remain consistent with language in the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct. The changes are described on page 4 of the agenda item. The CPC recommends the CBA approve the proposed regulatory text for sections 54.3 and 54.4 as presented. Direct staff to submit text to the Director of DCA and to Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review. And if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate a rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for hearing. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period or during the public hearing, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations at sections 54.3 and 54.4 as noted. This is also a fully formed motion and does not require a second. I will turn it over to the president for discussion and vote.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Any public comments from Sacramento? Moderator, any public comments?
The Q&A is open. Instructions are on the screen. If you would like to participate, click on the question mark and type I would like to make a comment. No request. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Reed, call for a vote.
Ariel Pay?
Yes.
Joe Rosenbaum?
Yes.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Evangeline Ward?
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines, Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Christian Lotta,
Yes.
and Dee Dee Owens.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. I will leave it to Ms. Hines if you want to start the next item, and we can break at 12:30 and continue after the petition, or you'd like to wait. Go.
Good morning, afternoon. As the Vice Chair of the consideration of the CPA Experience Requirements Task Force for CERT, I will be reporting on the CERT meeting from September 15th. In November 2021, the CBA established the objective and also the guideposts by which the CERT should perform its work. The CBA directed us to use the following question as a guide to evaluate the experience requirements for CPA licensure. Is the present attest experience requirement necessary and sufficient to support the CBA mission to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with professional standards? In its September 15th meeting, the task force received written reports from CBA staff regarding changes in other states regarding their attest experience requirements and highlights on the 2021 American Institute of Certified Public Accountants report on enhancing audit quality. Additionally, CERT received verbal reports from CBA staff regarding continuing education requirements and the accounting profession's requirements to adhere with professional standards. Jeff DeLizer, Chair of the Peer Review Oversight Committee, and Licensing Chief Michelle Center presented an overview of peer review reporting standards and how firm deficiencies correspond to peer review ratings. In its May meeting, CERT requested input from the Enforcement Advisory Committee, the Peer Review Oversight Committee, and the Qualifications Committee regarding the necessity of requiring a test experience for applicants seeking the authority to sign reports on attest engagements. The Advisory Committee chairs provided their reports at our September meeting. The PROC and QC reported unanimous support for the necessity of an attest experience requirement in support of the CBA mission. The EAC did not have consensus on the necessity of the attest experience requirement. Enforcement Chief Dominic Franzella reported on the results of the CBA's 2022 attest experience requirement survey. After these reports, a motion was made asking for the CERT task force to recommend to the CBA that the attest experience requirement is necessary for the licensure of CPAs in California seeking the attest authority. While this motion isn't actionable for the CBA today, and we will have an opportunity to dive into much of the background, information, and discussions that led to this recommendation, I want to provide some high-level information regarding the discussions on the motion. The task force members who eventually opposed the motion noted the following. Consumers aren't aware of this requirement, and most jurisdictions rely on general experience. States with this model don't have a higher degree of substandard work. Licensees have a professional obligation to understand and share whether or not they are qualified to do the work. If there is no attest experience requirement, this ethical obligation remains. Professional standards already address this issue. While the experience is important, having the experience does not guarantee that a licensee will not perform work above their pay grade. Those members who supported the motion noted, California wants to be more preventative and proactive, not reactive. Enforcement and peer review occur after the fact. We want to ensure that licensees don't put themselves out there saying they can do things they can't do. Having the attest experience requirement combined with the Qualifications Committee is a way for the board to show the general public that we're watching out for them. After discussion, CERT members voted to recommend to the CBA that they have found that the attest experience requirement is necessary for the authority to sign reports on attest engagements. As for next steps, staff will prepare an item for the November CBA meeting that will provide a recap of the meetings and information CERT discussed over its 3 meetings. The item will also include additional information on CERT's discussions on the necessity question that formed the approved motion. From this paper, the CBA will have an opportunity to discuss CERT's recommendation on necessity. If the CBA approves CERT's recommendation on necessity, it can provide feedback to CERT on its next phase of the primary question regarding sufficiency. Specifically, is the current attest experience requirement sufficient to support the CBA mission to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with professional standards? Thank you for seeking input from the CERT, and at this time, I will turn it back to President Savoy.
Thank you for that incredibly inclusive report. We have nothing on the table for us to discuss, as it'll come to us fully formed in November, at which point we'll have much more time to discuss the recommendations of CERT. And I'd like to thank everybody that has worked on this, because you've come a long way in a very short period of time. So thank you. As you all have surmised, we will get finished today. But right now, we're going to break for lunch. We have a 1:30 time certain, so please be back a few minutes before to get ready for some petition hearings. Thank you all and enjoy your lunch.